All right. Yeah, in Revelation 14, we, well, let me just mention that I believe, and I think most of us have been able to see that Revelation is really a book that takes us chapter by chapter through a developing story. And the way we have looked at it is that there are two significant divisions in Revelation, two significant divisions. There are actually about four divisions, but there are two significant divisions. The first half of the book, or the major part of the storyline, it takes you from chapter 4 to chapter 11. Then it picks up in chapter 12 and it goes to chapter 20, and it covers the same ground as chapter 4 to 11, but it covers it from a different perspective. We've been through that so many times. I'm not going to put up the charts at the moment, but I think most of us have understood that. It's the representation of the two kingdoms, the judgment from the perspective of the kingdom of Christ and the judgment from the perspective of the kingdom of the beast. So we are now in part 2, and we are looking at the history of the last days from the perspective of the career of the beast. So that's where we are. And we saw that, first of all, you have the beast coming up out of the sea, then the beast from the earth, and then they bring about this mark of the beast crisis. And when they bring about the mark of the beast crisis, the next thing that happens is that the three angels fly. Three messages, three emphases that God gives us. The first angel talks about the hour of God's judgment. This crisis constitutes the way that God brings the world to judgment. The second angel speaks about the fall of Babylon. There is a tremendous moral degradation that takes place in the religious bodies with the introduction of the mark of the beast. It's the final nail in the coffin of these religious institutions who have been God's people in name, but who have really been in the arms of the world. And the mark of the beast puts the nail in the coffin and enables them to take a stand where they really belong. And God's people are warned to come out of Babylon. The third angel identifies the issue and shows you that it's not simply a question of it's an issue that you can take whichever side you want. It shows you that this issue is eternal in its impact and its scope. Those who worship the beast, those who receive the mark of the beast, they will suffer the same destiny as Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's kind of where we were last week. We're not going to go back over the details this evening, unless afterwards anybody has any questions, then we can look at it. But we continue now with verse 12. We continue with verse 12, Revelation 14. It says, "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." Now, just a couple of things here, because there are some things that are mentioned here, which is one, keeping the commandments, and two, keeping the faith of Jesus, having the faith of Jesus. And there is a tendency that people of our persuasion, people in our category, they tend to make this, they tend to make this assumption. Every time you see the commandments of God, they assume that we're talking about the Ten Commandments every time. And while it is true that God's people walk in harmony with the Ten Commandments, I don't believe that the New Testament is always emphasizing the commandments, meaning the Ten Commandments. I don't believe so. In the New Testament, it is taken for granted that people who are in Christ will walk in harmony with the Ten Commandments, because Paul says, the righteousness of the law is fulfilled in us who walk after the Spirit and not after the flesh. So yes, God's people who are in Christ, they walk in harmony with the commandments. But over and over in the New Testament, when it talks about people keeping the commandments of God, it's more speaking about us following the instructions of God more than about keeping 10 statements. And why am I making this point? I'm making this point because when people become fixated on 10 commandments, there is a tendency for them to believe that in keeping 10 rules, they have fulfilled their obligation to God. There are so many who emphasize keeping the 10 commandments who think that because they go to church on a Saturday, that they have completed their responsibility to God, and they think that that is what Christianity is about. So the problem with focusing on the 10 commandments is that it makes you aim too low. I know how people sometimes would get upset to hear something like that, but that is the truth. God doesn't want God's focus is not us keeping 10 commandments. God's focus is us being in Christ, where the life of God in all its variegated beauty appears. So it's a life that is greater than 10 rules. It's a life that is in union with the life of God Himself, a far higher standard. You know that the Jews were great commandment keepers who killed the Son of God. And that's what I mean. But I understand why people will keep on focusing on keeping the 10 commandments, because they believe that it is they have made their religion revolve around these 10 rules. And so they see it everywhere in the Bible. I mean, if I could give you an example of places where these commandments are mentioned, and it doesn't mean the 10 commandments, I could look at 1 John chapter 3, the last few verses. It says, look at what it says in verse 22. It says, and whatsoever we ask, we receive of Him, because we keep His commandments and do those things that are pleasing in His sight. So immediately somebody says we keep His commandments, they say, the 10 commandments. If you are that kind of, if you have that kind of focus. But look at it says in the next verse, and this is His commandment. Okay, in the same passage, the same context where it says keep His commandments, He says, and this is His commandment, that we should believe on the name of His Son Jesus Christ and love one another as He gave us commandment. There He immediately defines what He means when He's talking about keep His commandments. And He goes back to it in the next verse. He says, he that keepeth His commandments dwelleth in Him, and He in him. So the commandment that John is speaking about, and by the way, John is the one who wrote Revelation. The commandment that John is emphasizing here is the commandment to believe on the name of His Son Jesus Christ and love one another. So what I'm saying, I'm not knocking the 10 commandments. I'm simply saying that when you look at the Bible, we should not immediately assume that because it says commandments, it means the 10 commandments. And I think that can lead somebody to become very legalistic in his approach. So it says the people of God, remember the context of the verse. It's talking about the mark of the beast crisis. In the mark of the beast crisis, it says, here is the patience of the saints. And let me see, I probably can find another version that says, here is a call for patience. Okay, I go to the NIV, which I know a lot of us don't like the NIV, understandably, but it helps sometimes. It says, this calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God. In the King James Version, it says, here is the patience of the saints, which is not very clear. What it is saying is that when the mark of the beast comes, there is a need for patient endurance on the part of God's people. It's highlighting the fact that this crisis will be prolonged for a time to the place where it is going to test our patience, it's going to test our faith, it's going to test our trust in God. So God highlights it for us beforehand, and He says, when this mark of the beast crisis comes, that everybody is so sure that they're going to overcome, fine, because in Christ we will overcome. It's God's battle and it's not ours, okay? But at the same time, it calls for patient endurance. And these saints are these holy ones, not sinners. These saints are identified as people who are obedient to God. They keep the commandments of God, and they have the faith of Jesus. The faith of Jesus, there's a lot of discussion from time to time about what this faith of Jesus means. Some people understand it to mean the faith that Jesus has. And I agree with this. But again, what is the nature of this faith? And I believe that one key ingredient of the faith of Jesus was that he trusted God regardless of the circumstances. When it seemed like God had abandoned him on the cross, well, it did happen. He trusted God. When it seemed like he was about to lose his life eternally, he trusted God. When everybody in the universe, I mean, when I think about this sometimes, it makes me shiver. There's only one person in the universe that was ever abandoned by every single being in the universe, including God. There's only one person. Nobody has ever, even the vilest sinner, his mother was always there to cry over him or his father. Or if they weren't there, God was always there to sympathize with him. There was always, Jesus is the only person who was ever completely abandoned by God. And he was alone. It says in Isaiah 53 or 61, I trod the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. So, but in all of this, he still continued to trust in God. And so I believe that when it says those who survive the mark of the beast, they have the faith of Jesus. I think this is what is being implied. And I want to emphasize this, brothers and sisters, because I mean, God has highlighted these things for us beforehand. Why? Because he wants us to know that we need to maintain our relationship with him and to bind ourselves to him in such a relationship that when this time comes, it will be easier to bear. I don't believe any child of God is going to be lost. No. But at the same time, I think it will be more traumatic for some than for others. And why do I say this? Because the degree of trauma we go through depends on the degree of our faith. You see two people in a fire, and one is bawling and crying out, and the other one is patient and he's enduring. One might even be singing. The difference is the kind of faith that each one has, the kind of preparation each one has. So I know God is giving us a kind of preview of what is coming, that we can be spiritually prepared by making sure that our relationship with him is firmly rooted and grounded where it should be. Now, in verse 13, it says,
Wait, before you move on to 13,
yeah, man.
didn't Jesus understand that prophecy you mentioned in Isaiah? Or tread the winepress alone?
I would think he did. I mean, you could ask me the question, did Jesus understand everything that was written in the Bible? And if you ask me that, I might say, not necessarily. Because I think Jesus understood what God revealed to him. Because as we know, he did not come here as God Almighty. He came here as a man, and he became a great prophet because he was so filled with the Spirit of God. But at the same time, what we learn is that many times God does not give every prophet all the light. So in order for Jesus to really be put to the test, some things had to be withheld from him. And clearly that is one of the things that he was not fully aware of, that his father would so fully abandon him, because even the night before he said to his disciples, the time is coming when you all will be scattered and you will leave me alone. But I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. And this is one of the things I remember sometimes when people suggest that if you are a Christian, you're not supposed to misunderstand anything. I don't agree with that, because I think that God is wise and he knows how to accomplish his purposes in us. And he gives us light and understanding that we need. But I wanted to say this before at the start of the meeting, and you just reminded me of it. This morning, as I was in prayer, also this thought came to me. The question comes to my mind sometimes, because people make this accusation. They say that we are presumptuous. Okay, they say that we are saying things that are a little different from what other Christians understand. For example, people in the One God movement, there are things that they understand differently. There are some things that they even say, well, you're saying this differently from how Ellen White said it. And somebody even accused me of saying things contrary to how the Bible says it. And I agree with that. Okay? The Bible says that blood cleanses us from all sin. And I say it's not blood, I say it's life. And everybody here agrees with that. And Jesus says that if your right hand offend you, chop it off. And I say he doesn't really mean you have to literally chop it off. And I think everybody agrees with me. So the point is that there are things that we interpret, and there are some things that we have greater understanding with. You know, I was thinking this morning that there are things in the book of Revelation. I'm sure Paul never understood it. There are things in the book of Revelation, I am sure John, who wrote the book of Revelation, never understood it. So who is going to understand it? I think we are going to understand it. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we are going to understand it because the book is there for a purpose. God didn't put this book there in a vacuum. There are things, there are highlights about the character and the nature of God that we are understanding, that I think even the great apostles did not understand as well as we understand it. Now, if that sounds presumptuous, remember the Bible says that the things that God is revealing to his people, even angels desire to look into these things. When I thought about that this morning, I was really a little bit thrilled because I realized that there is an open book before us who live in this time. There's an open book, and there are opportunities that if we come in a humble spirit and we depend on the Lord and we go to his word, and we ask him for guidance, there are things that we are to understand, things that God is to bring before the world or before his people that nobody ever understood in previous ages. And that's a really awesome thing to contemplate. Anyway, in verse 13 it says, "And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." So, what do we see here? It's talking about a certain point in time, from henceforth, from this point on. Now, what point are we talking about? Again, I want to say that we have to take the thing in context. We're talking about the mark of the beast crisis. If you take Revelation 13 and read from there to where we are here and go and look at it as a sequential series of events, what we are looking at here is God is saying, when the mark of the beast crisis breaks upon the world, some of God's people are going to die. And God is saying, those who die at that time are blessed. Okay, so why does he say this? I mean, all Christians, if you die at any time, aren't you blessed? Yes, everybody who dies in the Lord is blessed. But I think God is highlighting this at this point because he's saying that he's giving us, first of all, a reason for consolation. Okay? Consolation from two perspectives. First of all, because all of us want to live till the coming of Jesus, but some will die. Secondly, nobody wants to die as a criminal, identified as a scoundrel, hated and scorned by the world. But that is what will happen to the people who die at this point in time. So, Brother Kip, I think I need to mute you unless you're going to ask a question or say something. All right, I have to mute you, Brother Kip. Let me mute everybody. Okay, so yeah, so God says, the voice from heaven says, those who die at this point, from this point on, are blessed if you die in the Lord. And I see it as God trying to bring consolation to those of us who will be in great danger of losing our lives in this crisis. Not only because I think we're going to be close to the Lord, but also he's saying you're blessed because he wants us to have that thought in mind as we face death. Then he goes on to say, yes, the Spirit says yes. Why? What is the blessing? Because they are resting from their labors. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. They may rest from their labors. I suppose when you're when you're 22, I was 22 when I became a Christian, and all those years I was planning to be in the 144,000, and I was preparing myself mentally, physically, and trying to prepare spiritually to be in the 144,000. Now I am 70 years old, and I'll tell you the truth. When you are 70, yes, if you go through, that's fine. But when you are 70 now, you start to thinking maybe resting from their labors is also a desirable way as well, you know. So I think God is saying here, if some of you have to rest, remember, if you have to rest, that you are specially blessed. It's rest from your labors. You won't be involved in the last great work. You're resting from your work. But remember this, your works follow you. In other words, God remembers and heaven remembers the way you have stood for the truth, the way you have labored in the Lord. Heaven remembers. Your works follow you. So you are blessed because you get a chance to rest while others have to keep up the work. So it's another perspective on it that God is giving us. Now the next verse is another example of the reality that as you look at the book of Revelation, it's not always exactly how you see it. It says in verse 14, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Immediately you look at this, and you will come to the conclusion, if you read superficially, you say that this is Jesus returning. He is sitting on a cloud, and he has a golden crown on his head, and he has a sickle in his hand. As a matter of fact, many times when the coming of Christ is depicted, they use a picture like this. Jesus sitting on a cloud with a sickle in his hand. And so you think immediately, this is the coming of Jesus. But I'm going to say, no, it's not the coming of Jesus. And I'll explain in just a moment. The coming of Jesus is depicted in Revelation 19, when he is represented as coming on a white horse, and he has a sharp sword in his mouth to smite the nations, and his eyes are like a flame of fire, and he has on his vesture a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's the second coming of Jesus. What we are seeing here is similar to what we saw in Daniel 9, when it says one came with the clouds of heaven like the Son of Man, and they brought him before the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7. Yes. Now, how do we know that this is not the coming of Jesus? Because look at what happens. Look at what happens at this point. There we see Jesus sitting on the cloud with a sickle in his hand. What is a sickle for? A sickle is for the purpose of reaping a harvest. So this is the harvest of the earth. And if you remember the parables of Jesus, there are several parables that Jesus told about the harvest, and I'll just mention one of them. In Matthew chapter 13, he told the parable of the sower and the seed. The sower planted the seed, and then he says, in the time of the harvest, let me see if I can find the verse. In the time of the harvest, let me see if I can find the verse. Okay, it's not, I'm not giving, let me just look for harvest. It's in Matthew chapter 13. Yeah, it's Matthew chapter 13, verse 30. Look at what it says. He says, let both grow together, the wheat and the tares, until the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So Jesus told us a parable here, and he laid down a principle. He says, in the time of the harvest, two things are going to happen. First of all, notice what he says, gather first the tares. So in the time of the harvest, the first thing that happens is that the tares are separated from the wheat. This is before the actual gathering into the barn. There's a separation between the wheat and the tares. And this is what we see highlighted here in the book of Revelation. Back to Revelation. It says, the Son of Man has a sickle, and he's going to reap the harvest of the earth. Verse 15 says, and another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Now, what is the harvest? The harvest, as I just pointed out, is a separation of the wheat from the tares. The harvest time is when Jesus sends the angels on a job of separation. Now, what is it that causes the separation? From what we have been seeing, the separation is caused by the mark of the beast crisis. All of this that we have been looking at over the past couple of weeks is what constitutes the harvest. When the mark of the beast crisis comes, what does the Bible say is the purpose of this mark of the beast crisis? Let me go back to where it is pointed out in Revelation chapter 3. Look in the right panel. In Revelation chapter 3 and in verse 10, look at what it says. And let me just remind you of it. It says, let me go back to the King James Version so I don't, it says in the King James Version, because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, or during the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. Now, this morning, we were talking about the love of God and the care that God has for his people, and how he has made salvation such a simple matter for those who put their trust in him. This morning, we were talking about it. And as I tried to say this morning, you can look at something from two different angles. This morning, we were looking at God's love and God's compassion. This evening, we are looking upon the fact that in spite of God's love and compassion, God does what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is that the persons who reject Christ, no matter how much God loves them, God cannot save them. That's the other side of the coin. That's the other side of the picture. So, but God says, in order to make it clear, who is who. Remember what the parable said. There's a difficulty in discerning wheat different from tares, because an enemy came and he planted tares among the wheat. Now, if you are an atheist and you are an evolutionist and you are all the rest of it, what need is there of a test? Because you already hold up your flag high for the universe to see. But if you claim to be a Christian, if you claim to be a follower of God, who knows what you are? And God says there is to be a separation of the wheat from the tares. There is to be a public separation. Practically, how does this happen? It says an hour of temptation, an hour of testing is to come upon all the world in order to try those who dwell on the earth. This is what separates the wheat from the tares. Those who truly are in a living relationship with God, what happens to them? They take their stand with the Lord in spite of the mark of the beast crisis. Those who are hypocrites, they don't really know the Lord. They are only in it for the profit or whatever. Those who have been going by the name of Christ, but they don't know him, they take their position and they join the ranks of those who are in the mark of the beast. And so there is a separation that splits a line down the middle of the inhabitants of planet Earth. And it says, this is the harvest. The time has come to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Notice that expression, the harvest of the earth is ripe. And we can't overlook, I beg your pardon, we can't overlook the implications of what you said here. What makes the harvest of the earth ripe? It is the fact that the wicked have reached the pinnacle of their capacity for evil. And the righteous, are those who are in Christ, the saints, have reached the pinnacle of their capacity for representing God. You have a ripened harvest of God's people. The ripeness of the harvest means that they have come to full maturity. Ephesians chapter 4 is fulfilled in their experience. They stand in the fullness of the stature of the measure of Christ. And on the other hand, the fullness of darkness has appeared in the rest of the world. And so the world is separated into two camps. The harvest is ripe, the tears are ripe, and the wheat is ripe. It says, verse 16, and he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And this doesn't mean that they are gone to heaven. We're going to see that in a moment. What it means is that they have been separated, they have been sealed, they have been marked for God for all eternity. This is a harvest. It's the perfection and the sealing of God's people. Even though they are still in the world, they have effectively been reaped because they have been sealed for the kingdom of God. None of them will ever be lost again after that point. So the harvest is reaped. But we see that it is not the end yet. Jesus has not come yet. He doesn't come till chapter 19. And I'll point this out. Because it says, and another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. So we again see that the harvest, even though Jesus is sitting there with a sickle in his hand, we see that it is represented that angels are also involved in this work, as Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13. The angels are the reapers. And he says, in the time of the harvest, he says to the reapers, gather first the tares in bundles to be burned, in bundles to be burned, and gather the wheat into my barn. There is something that I want to emphasize, and the reason I'm emphasizing it is because it's something that is overlooked by a lot of Christians. And I don't just mean Adventist Christians, I mean Christians in general. One of the things is that because they don't put one verse of scripture with another verse, one passage with another, they sometimes develop faulty ideas. And you know, most Christians believe that anytime you talk about the harvest, it's straight to heaven. But if you study these prophecies of the end time properly, you will see that the harvest doesn't mean you go straight to heaven. It means that there is a time when you are locked up, you are sealed, and you are separated. The earth is harvested in that you are locked in with Christ, immovable, but you are still here physically. In the parable of the in several parables that Jesus told, he spoke about after the bridegroom, the parable of the bridegroom. He says the bridegroom came to the wedding and the guests went in with him to the wedding. And what happened? The door was shut. And what happened? Afterwards, the others came knocking on the door, the foolish virgins, and they are saying, Master, Master, open unto us. What time is that in the history of the world? When the wise virgins go into the wedding. This is after the harvest, but they are still on earth, because if they are not still on earth, where do these wicked come from knocking on the door? It's the door of salvation. Figuratively, it's the door of the ark. The ark of salvation is not heaven. The ark of salvation is not heaven. It is our place in Christ at the close of probation. So our place, Christ is the ark. If I can use the analogy from now as ark. Christ is the ark. God's people get into the ark. And at the time of the mark of the beast crisis, after everybody has had their opportunity, let us say figuratively, we have been preaching for 120 years. Then we are in the ark. Everybody who is in Christ becomes locked into Christ, and the door is closed. That means that everybody is sealed either for God or for the devil. At this point, Jesus says they are in outer darkness, and his people have gone in with him to the wedding. Then now, when the trials and the tribulation begin, the great time of trouble, the 7 plagues, some of them come knocking on the door. Like Judas, they recognize they are outside, but there's no change of their heart. They're only scared of what is coming, but it's too late. So the point I'm really making is that many times the Bible talks about a place of refuge, an ark of safety. It's not talking about heaven necessarily. It's talking about a condition here on this earth where we are safe forever from Satan and from his destructive ways and from his deceptions, but it doesn't mean that we have yet entered into heaven. That's the point I'm making, okay? So we see here, this is what is being pointed out here in Revelation chapter 14. The harvest is taking place, and it's taking place here on the earth. It says, and another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire. And he cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. I don't have a suggestion as to why it says this angel had power over fire. I'm not sure. Some of these statements, they are there, and I'm sure they have some meaning. I'm sure God is saying something to us, but I haven't quite figured out why this is being pointed out. Why does it say the angel comes from the altar and he has the power over fire? Is it because of what is about to come upon the earth? Maybe. The earth is about to be baptized in a fire like it has never experienced before. So maybe that has something to do with it. But he cries to the angel with the sharp sickle, and he says, gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So again, angels are represented here as doing or as participating in this work of separating the wheat from the tares. Now, here's why we know, here's why we can see clearly that God's people are not yet in heaven. It says, and the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and he gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Now, in case we're thinking that this is referring to the coming of Jesus, I want you to notice something. We're going to go to Revelation, the next chapter. We're now in chapter 14. Look in the right panel. In the right panel, I'm going to bring up Revelation chapter 15, and I'll show you something. Revelation chapter 15. Look at what it says here. It says these grapes, representing the wicked, because Jesus reaped the wheat. And now this angel is reaping the grapes. And the grapes are cast into the winepress of the wrath of God. So we can see that these grapes represent those who are lost. Okay, they are put into the winepress of the wrath of God. And look at what it says in chapter 15. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues. For in them is filled up the wrath of God. So what I'm pointing out is that, remember we said, Revelation is following a sequence. It's a story that is unfolding. So in chapter 14, you see the harvest taking place. And then in chapter 15, you see something that follows after the harvest. What we see is the wrath of God being poured out in chapter 15, chapter 16, chapter 18. You see the wrath of God being poured out upon the grapes of the earth. And in chapter 19, you see Jesus coming back. So you have the sealing, the mark of the beast comes, and you have the sealing of the 144,000, and some of God's people die, and some of them go through this great tribulation, and they're asked to have patience, and some of them are dying. And then there's a harvest, the separation of the wheat from the tares. And then when that separation takes place, the wicked are cast into the winepress of the wrath of God, which is the 7 last plagues. And in chapter 18, it tells you that great Babylon comes in remembrance before God to give unto her the wine cup of the fierceness of his wrath. And then in chapter 19, you see Jesus coming again. So it's a sequential series of events. Now you notice I didn't mention Revelation chapter 17, because chapter 17 is an explanation. It steps out of the sequence of events, because Revelation 17 is explaining who Babylon is and what she has been doing in relationship with the beast. And then in chapter 18, it goes to show you that she also is suffering the wrath of God. So it's a logical and a clear sequence. So what I'm saying is that this harvest here that we are looking at in chapter 14, this harvest here, is not the coming of Jesus. It's a separation of the world into these 2 camps. One camp is locked in the secret place of the Most High, dwelling under the shadow of the Almighty, sealed and safe, but still in the world. not necessarily free from all physical difficulties, but spiritually sealed forever. And the other group are thrown into the great winepress of the wrath of God, and they begin to experience the 7 last plagues. It says in verse 20 over here in the left panel, the grapes are thrown into this winepress, and it says, and the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Now, again, this is one of the verses that I don't know if I can give you a meaningful interpretation of what this means. Okay, what I am certain of is that I can show you that I can tell you that it has to do with it has to do with the punishment or the affliction. I don't even want to like to use the word punishment as though they are being tortured. It's the affliction that comes upon those who have rejected Christ and chosen the way of the beast. Their trauma is described as you throw grapes into a wine press, and they begin to trample on the grapes, and the juice of the grape, the blood of the grapes, it comes out because the grapes are crushed. That's the illustration that God gives us here. The blood comes out of the wine press, and it says even unto the horses' bridles. I'm going to take the time and look and see if I can find some connections in the Bible, because to be honest, up to this point, I don't understand this reference to the horses' bridles and the reference to 1,600 furlongs. There are some of these numbers that need further study, and I don't have a clear explanation to suggest. For me, it's not the most critical part of the prophecy, because we already know it's after the close of probation. It's during the time of the 7 last plagues. But what do these numbers mean, and what does this analogy mean unto the horses' bridles? I can't suggest a meaningful answer, but I know it's after the close of probation. So the winepress is trodden outside the city, and blood comes out of the winepress. Now, this brings us to the end of chapter 14, and it brings us to the end of the mark of the beast crisis, as far as the explanation of what it is about and how we are to face it and what it implies, because the mark of the beast crisis is really the great harvest of the earth. That's what it is. It's the great element, the great baptism of fire that separates the world into two camps. That is the point of the mark of the beast. Anybody wants to ask why God allows such a traumatic event to come upon his people? That is the answer. God doesn't just bring or allow difficulty upon his people for no reason at all. There is a very, very great reason for God allowing this great crisis to come, and why God asks his people to endure this kind of suffering. And that's what we have been looking at. God wants a demonstration to Satan and the universe of what the gospel really can do for people. And he wants a way to separate the world in such a way that there is no mistake about where you belong. Anybody in this planet who wants to say, I'm a Christian, but I have not yet, I don't have to sit in this seat or that seat. I'm going to become a Christian, but I haven't yet made up my mind. God says to the planet, you have been hanging around long enough. It's time to make your decision. And he puts the whole world in such a place that every single person must make his decision. And again, I want to say, brothers and sisters, let me show my face again. Again, I want to say, this is why I'm of the very strong opinion that, any crisis that comes, we have to make a distinction between the machinery that makes the crisis possible and the key element itself. What I mean is, we know that there is a lot of technological developments. What they are doing with AI and robotics and electronics and science, what they are doing They are creating an electronic world that has a capacity to do all kinds of amazing and wicked things. They are. But I'd like us to remember something, because I know that there are all kinds of theories. You go on the internet, you go on the dark web, you go on alternative sites to YouTube, and you see all kinds of ideas. But let me say this. I'm going to say something to you. Remember the principles of the prophecy. According to the prophecy, Satan's intention is not to kill off the people of the world. Not directly. That's not the mark of the beast crisis. The mark of the beast crisis is not an attempt to kill people. Mark that point. It's an attempt to get people to worship the devil. Remember that. It's not about killing people. So, when you hear about the World Economic Forum, or you hear about this other group, and their intention is to kill off 3/4 of the world population, that is nothing to do with the mark of the beast. Because the purpose of the mark of the beast, God's purpose in allowing it, is that God intends that everybody must show up his colors. Everybody must be able to take a position, because that is what God is after. The world is to be brought to judgment. So the mark of the beast, even though it will be implemented by use of technology, there is to be technology. There is to be great technological involvement in the mark of the beast. I don't know if they won't support it with a microchip or some other kind of electronic implant. I don't know, but I'm going to tell you that absolutely, if we believe the Bible, everybody must make a moral choice. They must make a choice where they recognize that they are standing against. I'm going to mute. I think I hear some noise. I'm going to take questions. If it is to test the whole world, everybody must stand in a place where he makes a choice, where he recognizes in his conscience, he recognizes, I am standing against God. That is the point of the mark of the beast, because if you don't recognize this and you don't take a stand, how are you to be judged? How is God to rationally separate the world into two camps if people are in camps and they don't even know why they are there? So I'm making that point because I believe that this is the whole purpose of the crisis. It's not a warning against a plot to kill out humanity. Let's not allow ourselves to be drawn into irrational side arguments. It's not a plot to kill humanity. It's a plot to get humanity to rebel against its God. That's what it is about. So when you look at the mark of the beast crisis, you can see that clearly. Now, because we're at the end of chapter 14, and I don't think it makes sense to start another chapter this evening, I'm going to just pause and to take questions or comments for the remainder of the time that we have at our disposal this evening. Get Sister Elizabeth maybe there, then I see Sister Dan, then I see the brother Ian, then I see Brother Michael, in that order. I'm not sure. I didn't see the hands when they went up, but I'm taking it in that order. That's how I see it. So first of all, Sister Elizabeth, she must be, I think it's her. Somebody was kind of making noise there, and you're back again. So you go first.
Revelation 13:14. Okay, I remember studying this.
I can't hear. I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're better now. What you had on before was making a lot of noise, so this is better.
Okay. Hold on one second. Let me turn it off. Okay. Your Bluetooth.
You're gone again. I can't even
Can
hear
you
you
hear
now.
me?
Try
David.
again. Yes.
Okay. I was studying Revelation 14:14, and this is what got me here. Look what it says. Now from 13 it says that the rest that they may rest from their labors and their works do follow them. Then look what 14 says. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, And upon the cloud, one sat like unto the Son of Man. One sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And my conclusion was from this was that I remember reading that that Rome had bought, Rome had usurped the position of God as the Son of God. And he wears a crown and he has a sickle. And it didn't say an angel like the next verse does that says, and another angel came out of the temple. This one didn't say the angel, and so I thought that it meant that this fake Christ, because it said one set like unto the Son of Man. He sits on 7 seas. So the Pope sits and he usurps the position of Christ. They bought the right to those who are going to broadcast them coming through the east gate of Jerusalem. So verse 14 said, to me, it's not talking about Christ on this verse, because we're talking about the mark of the beast coming. And so if they bought the right, that means everybody would have to buy it in order for them to see through TV or some sort of media, them to come through the east gate.
Mhm.
So I gathered this by verse 14, but then 15 comes and says, while this is happening on earth, here's what's happening in heaven. And another angel came out of the temple crying with a loud voice to them that sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle. So at this point is when Jesus no longer intercedes, and everything that he has in his hand as high priest gets thrown down. And when it gets thrown down, then his work is over. And now he's preparing to come. And so as he's preparing to come, he notifies the angels, and the angels, verses 16 says, and he that sat on the cloud thrust in the sickle in the earth, and the earth was reaped. So this is when the people are polarized into 2 groups, knowing this is God's kingdom, this is Satan's kingdom. And then 17 says, and another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came, 18, out from the altar, which had power over fire. Those saints who stand in the fire will not be consumed, because God is the only one that has power over fire, and his ministering angels, minister to those, the people of God.
Mhm.
The saints are only the ones that are standing in the fire when he comes, and will not be consumed like the 3 Hebrew boys. The only thing that was consumed on them were the Babylonian ropes.
Yeah.
So,
Let me interrupt you a little bit, Sister Elizabeth. Let me bring back up a verse here that I'd like you to look at and just consider something. The first thing that you said, I just wanted to look at this. I would have to disagree for several reasons, but let me just start with the first one. And the first one is, look, it says, in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man. It uses the same exact terminology. It says, one like unto the Son of Man. The verse that you pointed out to just now in chapter 14, it uses the same terminology. It says, one sat like unto the Son of Man. In Revelation here, Revelation
1:13.
Right, it's the same exact phrase that is used. Now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that in chapter 1, it's speaking of Jesus. But it doesn't say Jesus, it says one like unto the Son of Man. And the reason why John is saying this is because John has never seen Jesus in his glorified form. He knew Jesus when he was a man. So now he sees Jesus in a glorified form. And the best he can say is, this person looks like the Son of Man. He looks like the one I knew. But there's such a difference. I'm just going to be careful, and I'm going to say he looks like him. And in Revelation 1, you know beyond a shadow of doubt that it is speaking of Jesus. So when we look here in Revelation 14 and he uses the same exact phrase, I don't think we can use that phrase as a suggestion that it might not be him if we're consistent. But the other
Well,
thing
what's
is,
the purpose of one like? Because he's not the Father, he's the Son, so he's like the Father?
no. It's like if I saw somebody and I'm not sure who it is, I'd say this one is like Elizabeth, and it could be you, but I'm not sure because I left you in America and I see somebody in Jamaica. I say she looks like Elizabeth. That's what he's saying. He's not saying it's not him, and he's not saying it, he says he looks like him. And it's for us now to draw our conclusion about who he is. And the other thing now is that when you look at the entire context of the whole passage, it's talking about the harvest. The emphasis is the harvest. It's not talking, we're not now in a mode where we are looking at the deceptions of the beast or the mark of the other beast. In Revelation chapter 13, it tells you about the deception, the work of deception. But now we have moved past that. It's like God would jump back in now and go back to something that was already past, because it talked about deceiving the world by these deception and so on. Now we're not dealing with deception. Now we are dealing with the separation of the sheep from the goats. So Satan at this point appearing like Jesus would be totally out of context with the passage. So that those are the reservations I would have.
Okay.
But thanks for the thought, Sister Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Sister Da, you can go ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering, verse 20 about the wine press and the blood. You know that I always bring this up because there is a little time of trouble before the big time of trouble. There was the 3 plagues of Egypt that affected Israel before the 7 last plagues, which didn't affect them, but affected all of the Egypt in the world. To say that the mark of the beast is not about the killing of the people, which it probably isn't, but the fact that the devil delights in war and death, that he would still implement the killing of hundreds of millions of people. Because when these people die, they don't have to deal with the mark of the beast because they're going to die without Christ. So he's now sent millions of people to Christless graves. And for him, that's a triumph. So yeah, if this situation that we're in kills off millions of people, and I don't want us to think that people are not going to die. I'm thinking they are going to die. The devil is out here. This is a war, and he knows he's lost, but he's still going to fight like he hasn't lost. So millions of people are going to lose their lives, but they won't be confronted with the mark of the beast. But this is that trouble that comes before the test, before the big crisis. But they're already dead. And if they haven't, like you were saying about making a decision, these people have not made decisions, or they were on the fence about Christ, but they went to Christless graves. So to me, that could be what verse 20 is talking about, those millions of people that die.
Verse 20.
14, you were saying about the horse's bridle and the wine press.
The thing is, it's very important that we look at everything in context, because Revelation chapter, if we are following the sequence of events, we have the mark of the beast in chapter 13. We have the 144,000 appearing at the beginning of chapter 14. Then we have the 3 angels' messages. Then you have the harvest. Up to this point in this world at the moment, we have not seen the appearance of the 144,000, and we have not seen the mark of the beast crisis yet. We only see developments that seem to point in that direction. So I agree with you 100% that Satan is killing all that he can kill. He did it in World War I. He did it in World War II. He's doing it in Russia and Ukraine. He's doing it with the abortion of, with the abortion of babies by the millions all over the world. So I agree with you on that. But I'm saying that is not something peculiar to the end time crisis. That's the point I'm making. Because I'm focusing on the fact that some people say the mark of the beast is intended to kill off people. That's what I'm focusing on. So that's the point I'm making. And I'm not saying that Satan is not trying to destroy people. I'm saying that as far as the mark of the beast is concerned, we don't need to be focused on something that is killing off people as the mark, because that is not the purpose of the mark. God himself ordains or allows or permits this thing to divide people into moral camps. That's why God allows it. So that's the point I was really making, Sister Diane.
All right, good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the comment. Was it you next, Dan? I don't remember the order.
Yes.
All right, you and then.
Yeah, it was in the same vein that Sister Diane just mentioned just now. I think you pretty much cover what I was wanted to point out. But I just want to add that even in during the mark of the beast curses, I think Revelation says that those who do not have the mark in the hands and the forehead, that they should be killed if they don't worship the beast or its image. So there is a death sentence that is placed upon those who have the seal of God and who rejects the mark of the beast. So I just wanted to add that part.
Right, and that death sentence. Notice, it's not a way of killing people willy-nilly. It's a threat to compel you to make that moral choice. It's a threat, and the only people who will die is those who don't comply with the threat. And you know that those who don't comply will be very few. So it's not going to be a mass killing based on the mark. You know, so, but thank you for the thought. Brother Michael, I think you are next in line.
Can everyone hear me clearly?
Sure, you're very clear.
Thank you. So when we were talking about the treading of the winepress in Revelation 14, it brought to mind Isaiah 63, where it says, "Where art thou, red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat? I have trodden the winepress alone." You had mentioned that earlier. Is this referring to the same scene?
As you mentioned it, Brother Michael, I'm thinking it's a good passage to go and look at again. I won't answer you, and I can't answer you definitively because I never looked at it before in that context.
And because it's interesting, it says that for the day of vengeance is in mine heart. And he says, "And their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all in my raiment." Yeah, it just came to my mind right now because this is curiously how the Mormons view the second coming of Christ. They say he will come in red garments. But that's okay, that's an aside. The main question I had for you is I've been studying very closely Jesus's words about the days of Lot and the days of Noah. And Jesus said that both would be occurring simultaneously. And I think the days of Lot are fairly visible, very easily visible to everyone around us to see the rise of atheism and sexual immorality. But when I really consider the days of Noah, and I know Ellen White said this, so I want to kind of see your opinion. She had said that there was not a single atheist that existed in the days of Noah because the angel guarding the Garden of Eden was still visible. The key problem was the understanding of the character of God. The character of God led people to ignore Noah's warnings. And in the days of Lot, Lot's sons-in-law also didn't understand the character of God because when Lot had warned them that God was going to destroy it, they thought he was mocking, like he was making a joke of the situation. So I think that the key issue is the character of God to overcome the mark of the beast crisis, which I think your ministry is doing an excellent job in bringing to us. But do you believe that there were atheists in the days of Noah?
Okay, it's a question that will be based very much on opinion, and the opinion will be based on reasoning because we know so little about the days of Noah. But you know, if somebody asks what is an atheist, practically an atheist is somebody who practically, I would even question whether there are any real atheists. Practically, anybody who sits down in the night and does careful consideration will recognize that I didn't come here by accident. And a logical reasoning person, but there are people who effectively live like atheists, and I'm sure that in the days of Noah, there were people who effectively lived like atheists. You know, when the fact that the Garden of Eden was there and then an angel guarding the garden, that was 1,000 years. That was 1,500 years before the time of Noah. Now, 1,500 years ago, go back 1,500 years in time and ask yourself, what was happening on the world 1,500 years ago? That was before the Protestant Reformation. That was back in the days of, who was it? The names of those people, I don't even remember. We have no clue. They hadn't even, most people never even knew that nobody knew there was an Australia. Nobody knew there was a Jamaica or a Caribbean or America. Think about it, that if it's like the legends of the Knights of King Arthur and the Round Table. They talk about hunting for this Holy Grail. They might have heard that there was a garden guarded by an angel with a snake in a tree. And if you go to Greek legends, Greek stories and legends, there are stories like that. There's a story of Hercules who went to get the 3 golden apples from the garden of the Hebrides, and there was a snake in the garden in the tree. I think he had 7 heads that was guarding the tree. But if he got one of these apples, he would live forever if you got it from this tree. And it's clearly a story that has to go back to the legends of the Garden of Eden, but it came to us through Greek myths and legends. I'm sure that for many of those people before the flood, in the time of Noah, these stories were like legends. They were like ancient stories that they heard from their grandparents or great-grandparents, and they had gone into folklore. Because where was this garden? I'm sure that after a few years, nobody went anywhere near the garden again. They spread out over the earth and was doing their thing, and this garden maybe was in some distant place. Maybe jungles grew up around the area. I don't know. But I would think that there were practical atheists, even if there were no professing atheists. I mean, God meant nothing to them. Because otherwise,
I agree. It's just the way I see it is the days of Lot is the atheism that you have been talking about. But I see almost the days of Noah as the false religion of the world. And both of these would exist up until really very closely up until the days of Christ. I know that the Whore of Babylon is destroyed right before. And I think that actually was something we were talking about today. We can agree that false religion will exist up until the mark of the beast crisis.
yes.
Okay, that much I view. It's just what I feel is that the two false views that Satan is going to try push people away from the true narrow path, the true loving character of God, is an attack on the image of God, right? So homosexuality, sodomy, right? That's obviously an attack on the image of God. But false religion, I believe, will be united by what could be talked about earlier, maybe a false second coming of Christ. Because when I study the views of Christianity, so many believe that there will be 1,000-year reign here on earth. So many believe that. They believe the 1,000-year reign will be here on earth when Christ returns, and he will like have a temporal rule here on and I think that's like a perfect setup to unite all false religions. And in the days of Noah, they also practiced polygamy. But I'm now ranting. Other people have questions, but that's sort of my view. And I see your position about atheism taking over as undeniable. But like, I think there is a lot to false religion that we might be kind of overshadowing and finding a radical position different from the Adventist Church.
Okay, Brother Michael, thanks for the thoughts. Yeah, I don't really have much comment to make. I mean, when it comes to prophecy, as we say, some things we have to just wait and see how they work out.
What about the destruction of the woman, Brother David?
I think it's at the same time, down at the time of the 7 last plagues, it's when they are the great winepress of the wrath of God, and they are thrown into the great winepress of the wrath of God. If you match that with Revelation 17, it's in the same period of time that the 10 horns turn against the woman.
So is the woman destroyed before the close of probation or after the close of probation?
From my understanding, it's after the close of probation.
And is it before the 7 last plagues or after during the
7 last plagues? We could almost say maybe it's around about plague number 6, maybe, because I think when it says the waters of the great river Euphrates are dried up, which is in the 6th plague, the river Euphrates supported the city of Babylon. So the drying up of the river Euphrates, in my mind, would represent the that all support for Babylon is cut off. That's when the 10 horns would turn against Babylon. So everybody would stop supporting Babylon. So the waters are dried up. So I think it's right down at the very end there. Okay, so I think that takes us to the end of our study for this evening.
So, Brother David, there can be arguments then that the woman can influence what mark of the beast is going to be.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe that at the very least, she will cooperate with the beast. But remember that even if the woman influences the beast, it still will not be the mark of the woman, it will be the mark of the beast. There are two things about the mark of the beast. Number one, the beast implements it. But number two, it's an identifier of the beast. I believe it's not just that the beast puts it in place, because if the woman gives the beast a mark, you could say, okay, it now becomes the beast mark and he pushes it on you on behalf of the woman. Then you could say it's a beast mark because he's pushing it. But I believe the Bible implies more than simply that the beast is pushing this mark. I think the Bible implies that this mark is an identifying element of the beast. In that sense, it's not something that the woman is going to push on the beast. It's the beast's own identity, the beast's own nature that comes out in the mark. So that's where I don't think it's the woman who is going to be participant in this mark that the beast is pushing.
It's more like the beast pushing it on the woman.
Right. It's more like the beast pushing it on the woman because it's his mark.
I see that happening right. I mean, if what we're thinking is right, then we see it happening right now, because the church is the Pope is now supporting that thing, you know.
I mean, the brethren put up a thing in the testimonies group today. For the first time in the Seventh-day Adventist Church has accepted a gay minister. It's in Germany, but this man claims that he's bisexual, and the church accepts it. I mean, step by step, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to predict something, right? Because I know how things work. One has done it. Look and see, the floodgates are open. Look and see what will happen. So all of these denominations that think that their denomination is immune to it, I just say, let's sit back and see what will happen. That's why I understand that these denominations constitute Babylon, and it's going to become more and more apparent with every day that passes. Go ahead, Sister Dai.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to be a little late on that prophecy, because the president, I think his name was Pollock, I'm not real sure, of Oakwood, several years ago, did a sermon that Caitlyn was coming, referring to Caitlyn Jenner, and told the church they needed to get ready because Caitlyn is coming, and they were going to have to be prepared for letting her in. So it's taken, and that's been many years ago. So my husband was alive, so we're seeing the fruit of that now.
Wow,
but the
indeed.
church is being prepared, because I've heard other ministers in the Adventist church talk about this inclusiveness and being a safe place, years ago.
I mean,
oh yeah, I remember. I forgot about this one. Thanks.
Yeah, I've heard them. I've seen them accept transgenders, but this is the first time that there is a self-confessed bisexual minister who comes out, and the conference gets together, and the whole church comes together, and they vote, and they decide to keep him. So, I think it's the first time that this has happened in Adventism, and it sets a precedent. Brother Arthur, go ahead.
Brother David, you might just be being aware of it, but it has happened a long time ago. There's this I think it's in California, this woman pastor married to another woman, okay, in the North American division. They've long had, in fact, they had this group what they call Seventh Gay Adventists. It's been coming a long time also. This is a new bit that we're learning about, but it has been long established in there. This woman married to another pastor woman, married to another woman inside the Adventist church. They've had elders, transgender elders inside there. So all of these things have been fomenting for a while now. But to see this and what they're actually embracing now, it seems to be expanding its wings now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a situation, Brother Thomas, that called "It's Okay to Be Gay in SDA." This was when it wasn't real cool to be gay, period. And they had camp meetings that the conference sent people to. They were saying in the review, oh, well, it's not that we're condoning it, but okay, these people are, it's okay to be gay in SDA, and you're sending someone there to be a speaker. Wouldn't that be like condoning it?
Mm-hmm.
You're not embracing it, but you went to their camp meeting. So that was like giving them the okay. And that was years ago. So this thing, just like the women ordination that everybody said was going to be the gateway to gay homosexual stuff, back in the day, that's what they were saying women elders was going to lead to. And you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't understand the connection back then. But now, as we've seen these creeping compromisings along the way, this is not news about this guy. It's almost not.
The reason why this is a significant thing for me, Brother Arthur mentioned the female minister being married to another female, and I'd forgotten about that, but that is true. And maybe the reason why that never made such an impact on me was because I know that the General Conference in general has not accepted female pastors. This is California in that respect was almost a breakaway conference because they were doing things contrary to the General Conference's mandate. And I know that Kinship was not an official Adventist organization, even though there were people in the Adventist church that were supporting it. But this that happened today is officially accepted by the Adventist, the proper Adventist structure. So that is why it seems so significant to me, because I believed, and I still believe, that when he talks about the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not, as a mark for God's people to get out, I believe that that has to do with the church is accepting the gay lifestyle, something that God forbids, and for the churches to come out and embrace it. And I've looked at that as a kind of marker, because up to this point, I've not been saying to Adventists that they have to get out of the denomination. I talk about the things that happen there, and I leave people to make their decision. But I've always said in my mind, when they accept homosexuality officially, that will be my marker to tell everybody to get out. So the fact that this man is a minister, and the church has had, well, it's a church in Germany. I suppose we still have to see if there's going to be any comment from the worldwide church, but that is a significant mark to me that that conference, that union is okay with it, So
Brother David, I
I'm
think
sorry.
just a quick thing I'm saying. I think the reason why it didn't make an impact with the woman, because she quit pastoral her position, and then announced that she's or she's lesbian or whatever she called herself. But
okay.
she did quit being a pastor first, then went full blown into a gay lifestyle. So that's why it never went far. But this guy now, he's a current pastor
Yes,
announcing that he's bisexual.
right. And being retained in his path. They met and they discussed it and they talked about it and voted about it, and they're keeping him. So that's what makes it so significant.
But wasn't there another conference over there that it embraces the Netherlands or Norway or some place that has a whole conference for
It
certain?
was in Netherlands, but what they did was
Okay.
they made a proclamation that it was to be an open place, inclusive, for where gay people were to feel at home. But they never actually appointed any ministers, but they just made a statement that it was a safe place for gays.
Which was an open door.
Absolutely.
Which is an open
Absolutely.
door. If you're a safe place for me, well, guess what? I'm a gay, I'm a lesbian lady, and I want to be a pastor in your church. Well, you already make the safe place for me.
Right.
They have been very accommodating, Brother David, over for many years now. From about 2015, I recall, They have been very accommodating to these sort of people.
Giving them money.
And even though they might not have come out and think their magazines and a lot of the stuff that they have embraced it. And there was never a statement from the GC head that clearly put it in its place as it ought to have been. So as a result of that, they got power and they continue to expand themselves until this. I'm not surprised. In fact, we all know where the writings of E.G. White is, but there's a thing that she wrote, and I look at it all the time. It's from Christ's Object Lesson, page 414 to 415, plus a few other things what she wrote, and it tells me clearly that this thing would have happened. So I'm not surprised. They've had this Seventh Day Adventists, and they've been dabbling and playing some funny stuff for years now. So this, no surprise to me.
In a church that I used to attend, there was two, not while I was attending, but there was two men who were living together, living together. And the church was concerned because they were making, one was a good cook. They were bringing all the good food to the fellowship dinner. They had, how that goes. And so one was an elder, one was a deacon. So they were like, oh, this was before this stuff was coming out about, and they said, well, you know what? We are going to separate ourselves, and we're not going to, because the church gave them this. Okay, it's okay to be gay as long as you're not sexually involved. That's what the church official stand was. As long as you weren't sexually active and you were professing to be gay, that was all right. So they said, okay, we're going to separate ourselves, and we're not going to, but we got so much entangled that it's just hard for us to separate. Okay, so they were going to continue to live together. They were going to be elders and have these positions in the church. This is before the transgender lady. This was years ago that this happened. And so we're to trust that you are going to be sleeping in the same house as you all always have, but we're to trust that you're no longer fornicating, but you've got so much invested that you can't separate. Well, heterosexuals who are really invested, who are really entangled, have always been able to split the stuff and separate. So what makes your situation, because they couldn't even get as involved in their stuff as heterosexuals, because heterosexuals had the marriage, and so everything was tied to them. Back then, all they couldn't do those kinds of things, right? So why was it that they were so involved that they couldn't separate, and the church left? So I guarantee it, and I couldn't put any money on it, but I can guarantee you, since all of this stuff has evolved, they don't, if they weren't already back in the same bedroom, that they probably in the same bedroom now.
Oh boy, even gruesome to think about it. Let me. I don't think we had a closing prayer, so let me close so that those who want to go can go.
Is his name Pastor Sasha Vic?
I'll have to go back
Yes,
and look at it. It's in the testimonies group, so I don't remember the name. But let me have the closing prayer.